I want to start by thanking everyone for coming. This is, I don't know, maybe our 13th year of doing this event, and I'm just always so pleased with people taking time out of their schedules to come here, network, listen, really participate, and vote with their time. So thank you very much for coming. We're really excited. We got a little bit different format today. We're going to bring a couple more brokers up and have a panel discussion after I give some introductory comments for the first half hour. So first off, thank you to you guys as well as to the team and to my assistant Cassie back there. A thankless job, if you can imagine, working for me. Probably not very fun, but she does such an amazing job. So a quick round of applause for Cassie. So every year when I go through this presentation, I'm trying to find some interesting story to tell. In this year, we're going to have our same agenda: rent and vacancy, development pipeline, talk about investment sales. The last I'm really excited about, we're going to do a brokerage panel. My partner Jerrid's going to come up for a little bit of time, and then I'm going to bring up a couple other brokers on the team, and we're going to have a broader panel discussion about other markets throughout the state of Washington. So excited to do that a little bit different. I start each of these out with a theme of what I feel like is going on in the market. And over the past couple of years, I've bifurcated that between what's happening with operations and what's happening with capital markets. And when thinking about it this year, I really feel like the sentiment is merged. And this is the best graphic I could come up with it, is searching on the lookout for commerces. And I think that's what everyone's looking for and hopeful right now, that cranes are coming down. We're seeing the inklings of maybe some rent growth in a few markets. And we're starting to see maybe some consistency with capital markets, and maybe that's too soon to tell, but I feel like a lot is behind us and now we're looking forward ahead of what's to come. And I'm really feeling some excitement in the market, especially with investment sales, of people really wanting to get things done. And that's kind of the theme right now, is looking ahead to commerces and where we're headed in this next market cycle. I put this up last time, and this is the investor behavioral curve, and we've all seen this before, and we like to progress through that. We're still in this context of the bottom, and the question is always, where are we if we come up from the bottom? And I looked at this slide last time, I was like, have we moved to relief yet? And I think that last graphic of looking for commerces is the answer is no. We can't quite say we've had relief yet, but we see that relief is in sight, and people are saying that there's some stability forming. And I think that hope is still in the market, and I'm really seeing a lot of engagement. And I look at other asset classes, and for anyone here doing office space, it's tough to see what the future looks like. Retail still, industrial's trying to find its footing. They're seeing some higher vacancy than I think the industrial markets have been used to. But multifamily is still, I believe, the strongest, most consistent asset class. And so I really feel like we're on this launch pad for what's to come up next. And I see this year as a transition year. So kicking off with rent and vacancy, looking market-wide, this is for data across the 4 western counties. Many of you have seen these slides before. And if we look going through the last 12 months, we had peak rents across the market over this last summer, and they came down off of the summer, not surprising. In certain markets, we saw some growth over the winter, but they did dip through the winter time in the region. That's pretty typical, but we're still seeing elevated vacancy. And a lot of that is in urban markets where we've seen a lot of supply of whether it's downtown Tacoma, downtown Seattle, Redmond, and we're still grappling with that supply. And so we're seeing these elevated vacancy numbers. I think the big switch from those that were here about 5 months ago at our last forum is when we break down in each of these markets, when we looked at the data over the summer, every one of these markets was in the green. And now we're seeing them, each one of them has clawed back a little bit. And I think that is showing, you'll hear me, maybe I should have put some booze at every table and have a drinking game every time I say choppy. But the market's choppy right now. We're seeing a lot of choppiness. I talk to owners, we're seeing some good rent growth, and I see some owners that are having some rents, on trade outs are going backwards a little bit. And so I was, in Pierce, we're starting to find some footing in Pierce. It had less deliveries. Kitsap, we had a lot of deliveries, but we saw a little bit of growth, but vacancy is still elevated. So across all these markets, I was seeing real good positivity last year. We've receded a little bit, but I do believe it's that old moniker, it's always darkest before the dawn. And we had peak deliveries in Q4 2024. That was the peak, and we'll talk a little bit about development today. And what we're looking for is where we're going to gain footing, where we're going to see commercies ahead. And so turning to the Seattle neighborhoods, it's a graph you've seen before. Blue is rent, we'll put a vacancy line up there. No surprise, rents ran up in the mid 2016-17, COVID, they went down. I think the real story here is this choppiness going back and forth in Seattle trying to find its footing. And we're above pre-COVID rents, so we've settled above there. We'll have a little bit more commentary today breaking down between asset classes, older vintage, newer vintage, small and big, sub 50, over 50, because the markets in finding their footings are starting to bifurcate. We're starting to see growth in different areas. When we look at vacancy, it's no big surprise. We had a peak during COVID. It settled back down, and it came back up due to new deliveries. But what I think is really surprising, if we look at the quantum of deliveries we saw in this market through the last couple of years, it's a real testament to the stability of the Seattle marketplace and its neighborhoods, that despite record deliveries, we've really held on to rental rates and kept vacancy in control. Now, I've got to give a shout out to CoStar providing really good data. Also, the development data, we do our report once a year. This ain't my data, so I can't stand behind it, because our new development study's in process right now. Where's JD? He's got 1,700 rows in Excel right now. He's got to reduce down to 800 in the next 60 days, so I think he's got AI doing most of it this year. He says he does it himself, but I saw some chat GPT up the other day. So this data, I think it's wrong. I think directionally it's correct. About 4 months ago, we had 7,500 units under construction in Seattle. CoStar is reporting 1,300. I think it's probably more like 4,000. So I think we still have a lot more to go, and even more in 26 still coming. But it's shrinking and nothing more is getting added. And I think we all know that story is true, but the difference now is in front of us. We're not seeing the cranes getting erected, we're seeing them come down. In fact, we're seeing less cranes around. So I think what I'm feeling with Seattle is, one, the investor sentiment's coming back, and two, we're on the precipice of seeing some real growth. It looks better than it ever has walking around downtown Seattle. But to me, if we're seeing growth in rents, and vacancies not spiking during all this new delivery, that's a testament to the strength of the market, especially relative to talking to people that think Capitol Hill still is in chop jazz. And they're out there. There are still people, especially on the West Coast, and depending on what news channel you watch, think that's occurring. Switching over to East King, so all of the east side, a little bit different story because rents ran up there because the developers hadn't moved over there as early as Seattle, and development really kicked off in 2014. It didn't kick off on the east side till 16 or 17, and we saw rents drop off during COVID a little bit, but the difference is this huge run-up, and we've talked about this the last couple of years, is run-up on the east side. The difference right now is we actually saw rents subside on the east side a little bit. And I don't think there's any challenges on the east side other than deliveries. In fact, Bellevue's doing, West Bellevue's doing fantastic. Kirkland's seeing some of that growth. And again, on the vacancy side, we see this peak running up. That's new deliveries coming in as a lot of developers moved across the lake. They started delivering new buildings. It took a little bit of time for lease up. And this is during COVID. The east side had what I call a graph with perfect curves. It's kind of a dating joke. But good rent growth, great occupancy. We're starting to see a little bit of tick up in vacancy on the east side, purely due to deliveries, and we're seeing this it's very dependent on location. Redmond's got a lot of deliveries, super strong market, but a lot of deliveries. Overlake's still got deliveries, so we're working through those. And as you can see, cranes were mounting over this last cycle. We've still got several thousand units to deliver, and we've got a big pipeline coming. Again, this data right here, we break it up into what's permitted and what's in permitting, and this data is just a gross figure, so I think it's overstated. This is not what's under construction. It's just what's planned, and we'll talk a little bit about the likelihood of what's going to happen with these. But overall, East King has been the strongest performing market. In every presentation I've given for the last 3 years, rents were up, vacancy was down. This is literally the first presentation I've given where we've seen an uptick a bit in vacancy, and it's purely due to the number of deliveries. In fact, the job growth on the east side in tech is just, I think, a hint of what we're about to see. And I was talking to an office broker who's here, that we trail the Bay Area, and the Bay Area job growth is becoming off the charts, and I think that's next for us. A key insight, I showed this slide before, average rents in 2019, East side was about 8% higher than Seattle. Fast forward to year to date now, they're about 20% ahead of Seattle. And if you look at that cumulative growth in the Seattle region, we've seen about 1% rent growth year over year for 5 years. Now some years we saw 10, 12% growth because we're recovering post-COVID. But overall, that's really anemic growth. And on the east side, we've seen solid 4% growth, 20% cumulative growth. There's two takeaways I have here, and for those of you who were here last time when I showed a similar slide, one is east side's great, it's done really well, and the other is Seattle's affordable. So there's a 20% higher ability to pay that's not being realized just due to livability of a choice of renters. And so this slide can be looked at two different ways. Seattle is starting to catch up a little bit now, but overall our urban markets are really healthy, and that's always been our springboard for growth. And I see that as being our springboard for growth from 2025 and beyond. And this is the first time I can come up here since COVID and say these markets are very balanced and all growing at this point. Looking at North King took a little bit longer to run up rents. During COVID, really peaked. And now is flattened out. And if you look at this curve on vacancy, it's really telling what's going on with vacancy. You look here in the last several years, that's new development. We've seen a massive amount of new development come into these North End markets. They're really quality markets, and for those of you who have heard me make an analogy to the Bay Area, to me, our North End is like the East Bay in the Bay Area. Really great bedroom communities that in the last 20 or 30 years grew up into what I call urban suburban markets. I got in the car this weekend and went up to a new burger joint in Mill Creek. There's interesting things happening up north. Those of you who've heard my cupcake index, that's based on the North End. You can text me if you want to hear about my cupcake index. It's very scientific. So what I'm seeing in the North End is a lot of deliveries, really good markets up there, and then we still have more coming. So my expectation the next 5, 6, 7 years, the North End is going to overperform because I think everyone expects a rebound in Seattle, or at least I do. And everyone knows there'll be growth on the east side, but I think the North End is a market where we're going to see continued growth. It's just muted right now due to all these new deliveries. And as you can see, it's got one of the smallest pipelines coming up. So keep your eyes on those markets. I think, I call Mill Creek the Bellevue of the North. And I think there's going to be some interesting opportunities as we enter this next cycle on the North End that people aren't paying as much attention to as elsewhere. Switching to South King has always been this really rock solid blue collar growth market. We've seen strong rent growth from early cycle. During COVID it grew. And then what happened basically is rents peaked, a lot of groups doing value add, and the market said, look, rents are a little bit too high, and they subsided, and it's been a little bit choppy, and it's been hunting in the South End. We don't have a lot of deliveries down there. We've got some, but it's really just trying to find equilibrium. And when the government shut down transfer payments in 2022, essentially subsidies, that really hit the South End. And this is a market where I don't have the greatest data, so I didn't put it up. The issue that's coming up here is delinquency, and that's what's not shown. And so we're showing vacancy in this market, and it peaked early cycle, rents got a little too hot, lots of demand, and now it's picking back up. If you layer in here another element of what we call economic loss, which is delinquency, this is where you're seeing double-digit economic loss. So you're seeing 5 to 7% vacancy and maybe 3 to as much as 7% delinquency. And this is the challenge for owners in the South End, and we'll talk about this in the investment sales slides, is why we haven't quite hit pricing in the south end, and that's why we have the lowest transaction volume in the south end I've ever seen in my career, and that's because investors are trying to figure out, what rent am I going to collect? And that's really been the big question in the south end. Development, not a huge story here. We've got some development down in that market. It's not impacting things. I think it's proving more than anything that new development is viable in the south end now, depending on location. It's just a matter of price point. Turning to Pierce County, Pierce has been a really interesting market. If you look at this growth curve from early cycle to now, I mean, rent started just a tick over $1,200 last cycle, and they've only hit just above $1,600. That is extremely affordable when the east side's $2,600. So Pierce is one of our most affordable markets, and there's this bifurcation between urban Tacoma, we'll talk about that later, and broader Pierce County, but it's had strong growth. But this is, as you can see from the graph, the first time I've talked about Pierce County, we're seeing a little bit of drop off in rent growth. Now, part of that, new development has slowed down, which is the skew of the new. Part of that is just we've hit peak rents. And also you look at this run up of vacancy, that market experienced a lot of deliveries. It's starting to absorb those deliveries, but if we look at the development data really shows that's a lot of units to deliver. I do think this data is a little bit off. I think we've seen a couple thousand units delivered in the last couple years in downtown Tacoma, with a few thousand more to go. And that's just not a market can absorb that number of deliveries. Now they will clear, and once they do, I do think we're gonna see strong growth in that market, because across the region, it is our inventory of affordable product. That used to be South King, it used to be North, and those markets have become very, very expensive post-COVID because of out-migration from the core urban centers. Now, everything we've looked at has been retrospective, and truly what everyone cares about is what's gonna happen, what's next. And where's Ryder? Ryder's our analyst. He used to have an even fuller head of hair until I started looking at this data. Ryder looks at this data, and we looked at Q3 in Yardi. And so off to on the left-hand side is Q3 2024 Yardi data. And there's probably 5 data providers out there. Yardi's in a fight for the top 3. And these numbers used to be double at the beginning of the year. And I was joking with Ryder that, oh, they just didn't have enough subscribers. So they just ran up their rent numbers. If you look at Seattle, Yardi in Q3 said Seattle was gonna grow 3% rents. That seems pretty good. If you look 1 quarter later, they're growing rents 1.3%. They dropped it in half. If you look at 2026, they went from 5.3 down to 1. They went down by 80% of growth. And if you look across these markets, when you look at Redmond, they were talking about 5% growth to 0.3%. If you were in this impacts some of the mid-sized and more institutional investors and developers more than some of the smaller groups, but if you've got to justify an investment and you're looking at this data, how do you make a decision? And that's really been one of the challenges in this market, is it's a crisis of confidence. Where are we going? What's going to happen? So there's a bunch of markets. All these slides will be available if you want to study them. What I'm showing this is more from a relative basis and an absolute basis to make the point of it's very hard to prognosticate what's going to happen if you're using broad market data. Now switching over, a complete flip-flop, this is CoStar data. They started, mid-year Q3, Seattle was 4%. Look who wanted more subscribers. Seattle went to 8.8. What the hell happened in October? Like, I don't know, did they get a new analyst? Did they get a new data team? So I think this is more accurate. Use this number if you're presenting to your committee and you want to buy. But it really punctuates what's going on in this market, is this crisis of confidence. What I think the smart move is just see what's happened over the last 40 or 50 years and trend that forward. Look at broad economic cycles versus in the minute what this data shows. And you can look at Bellevue. I mean, I want to do a show of hands to who thinks Bellevue's a declining market, but they went from 4.2 to 8% in Bellevue, which I think is realistic. This is a competing data provider where they cut rents in Bellevue by 50% quarter over quarter, when Bellevue's absorbed 2 million square feet of office space in the last 12 months. And rents are on fire over there. So, and if you look at, Bremerton's recovering from a lot of new deliveries, they went from 4% to 11%. So, it just punctuates the point that it's been a tough market to really understand where things are headed. And I think those of you and those of us that can see through the noise and make decisions right now, and you'll hear my sales pitch where the time is waning to buy, we will see this rent growth. Now, whether it's 1.3 or 8%, we don't know, but I think looking at what consensus is going to get you nowhere. Turning to the development pipeline, again, caveats, I always talk about development. This is my data, 412, 130,000. So we've delivered about 9,000 units a year, every year for the last 15 years, and we've absorbed them. What we have coming is under construction about 9,000 units. I think probably the real numbers, 12 or 14,000 based upon my data I pulled last year, and we'll have, like I said, updated data. But it's by mid-year 2026, it's going to be darn near zero or just some new stuff coming. So from a development perspective, looking at these urban markets, you look at Seattle, call it 3,500 deliveries a year. Everything in the lighter color is a forecast. So it's dropping off markedly. And if you look at prospectively, some developers will be delivering in 28 or 29 that are getting in the ground now, probably late 27. So they will add to this, but there's not many. You can count them on, if not 1, 2 hands in any of these dense urban markets. And the same thing on East King. They have less deliveries historically. They've got more coming in 25. There's quite a bit, but if you look at that forecast, it's pretty anemic. Now, why is this happening? Similar data, I haven't adjusted this data for my last presentation, but capital markets have changed. But the punctuation is, this first column is development costs, and the low end, $450 a unit. Recent sales, probably the bottom was the low 300s, midpoint 500, 375 a unit. This is what it costs to build versus what you're selling them for in the high end. But just looking at some numbers, talking to general contractors in the market, pricing off the peak is probably 10 to 15% off the peak. So if you look at 500,000 a unit and you take 15% off, you're at 425, and I'm sure plenty of developers can argue with me what that number is going to be. But if you look at high price of sales, it's 425. So that replacement cost story is starting to wane right now. There's a existing building, high-rise in Bellevue, the whisper in the market is it's going to go for probably 5% below replacement. Replacement cost for high-rise is $750 a door, and there's a whisper that's around under contract to take over $700 a door at a 3.7 cap. And that's in Bellevue high-rise. So these numbers are starting to come in line, and we're going to see, one, sales prices go up, but also developers being able to put a shovel in the ground. Now, switching for sales data, what everyone came here for today, and looking at what's happening across the region, and this is a slide you've seen before, big run up, so red is number of transactions, blue is total dollar volume. The punctuation, we saw a big run up 2019, excise tax, 2020, dropped in 2020 for reasons we know, but the punchline here is, for about 6 years in the middle of the cycle, we were selling about 500 apartment units a year across the region, about 500, somewhere between 6 to 8 billion in transaction volume. 2023 was worse than COVID. It was a major drop off, and you can see we were 150 units. We were off by 80% in transaction volume. And value is down, transaction volume is down. This last year we saw it tick up, but most of that was bigger institutions coming into the market. And we saw several transactions that were 80, 100 plus million, which pushed us up to about just under 4 billion in total volume. And that compares about 50% of normal in just over 200 transactions, 222, and that's about 50% of normal. So even though we've seen a rebound from last year, we're still quite a bit off total transaction volume, and we're about 30 months into this. So I've never seen a cycle take this long to play out in a downturn. I don't think it's really happened even in the early 90s. RTC, they sorted through this faster than we are right now. If you look at pricing, this is price per square foot. We use that versus price per unit because, again, I say, what's a unit? Is it 200 square feet or 800 square feet? So we look at price per square foot, and we've seen that nearly double. Early cycle was around 200 a foot, got up to about 400 a foot. 2020 went down, big surge, but we've been down every year since the peak in capital markets. And then you turn to cap rates, we saw this big compression come down, and we've expanded. And so this is, we surveyed, we call every buyer, every seller, and we surveyed all 222 sales. We don't reach everyone, but if you look across the market, it's about a 5-3 in the market. We'll dive into that a little bit more in a moment. But the reality is we rarely see it run up. If you look at these curves, over time cap rate compression continues. If we look at actual capitalization rates, and again, you'll have these slides, but I'd say core 4.75 to a 5 in Seattle. East side, I flipped a coin to go down to 4.25. I think we could justify that. I think that market's probably still priced 20, probably 50 bips higher than Seattle. But if we look to stabilized, if you look from 4.75 or 4.5 to peak, so across the market in core, it's about 100 basis points. That's fairly tight across all asset classes to be within about 100 basis points. I think we're gonna see cap rates, we're gonna see core product compress, we're gonna see other product expand a little bit, and I'll show you different times where we've seen this so tight. If you look at value add, yeah, if it's really good quality value add, it could be a 4.75 going into the right location. This is well managed, and it goes out to a 7. That's over 200 basis points. That's a little bit more healthy. I think the core is still mispriced. So I went back to the data and I looked at, historically, the biggest compression we saw in cap rates was mid-2022. So this is data from mid-2022. And again, some of these cap rates were, I saw some 3 caps in 2022, and some of them were 8 caps. But across the market, 30 bips. That's just not normal. The reason I'm pointing this out is this is going to change, and once it changes, the markets will stabilize and opportunities start to go away. If you look out to where we are right now, 30 bips. The difference is everything's in the 5 caps, not the 4 caps. These are anomalies. 2022 was an anomaly. It was a fun anomaly. I really enjoyed it. A lot of sales and everything got done, but this is another anomaly where things aren't getting done. And when it's anomalous and out of the bell curve, things change. And that's what I'm predicting for capitalization rates, is we're gonna start to see some things change, and we're on the precipice of this right now. So at this point, I'm gonna pause from this, let them reconfigure things, and we'll resume with the brokerage panel. Jerrid. There's no shame in grabbing more food, so now's your shot. All right, so much for the intermezzo. So, Jerrid, can you describe generally where you're spending most of your time in brokers these days?
Yeah, so as most of you know, and we'll introduce the rest of the team at the end, our team covers the state of Washington. I specifically focus in Seattle with Jack and Matt, and we cover 5 to 100 unit buildings in Seattle, Washington.
And so in Seattle, and we talked about it at length with the slides, we saw Seattle was hit really hard with COVID, rental rates went down. We're starting to see some rebound to that. What are you experiencing when you're talking to clients? What are you seeing with rental rates across these urban markets in Seattle?
So want to reference the data first, and it's interesting we break them out in building sizes, and I think it has a lot to do with ownership structure and how they're being managed. But you can see from the pandemic until we completed our market report this year, rents have risen about 9% in the smaller buildings and 20% in the larger ones. So that's the data. It's about 2% a year for smaller buildings and 4 to 5 if you're not compounding for the larger, which I think is better than most people realize. As it relates to the clients, what they're experiencing, it's been, I'd say, a more challenging couple of years. What the highlight last year was not related to rent declining, but actually vacancy growing. I think there's a lot of competition with new units coming online and offering a lot of concessions. It's making new, what I'll call more superior product competitive with some of the older, smaller buildings.
So it's almost like rates are becoming a little bit universal across all the product, and the older, smaller is suffering just from competition.
Yeah, and I think that changes pretty quickly. As these buildings are filled, they're not going to be offering 8 to 10 weeks of concessions. The person that's right now affording that nice new unit isn't going to be able to. They're looking for a unit in the 5 to 50 year building, for example.
So where are you seeing, I mean, it sounds like the biggest impact to growth right now, other than just job growth, is development. Are you seeing that real-time subside, or do you expect that's going to take more time?
It's a good question. Let's look at this slide. So this is from the city of Seattle, and this is apartment deliveries over the last several years. I mean, we delivered an immense amount of units last year. The greens and red bubbles are subjective to what I think is good and bad. So good being we had limited deliveries in 2020 and 2021, we saw massive rent growth. If you actually look back at the data providers, they're saying we have 14% rent growth between 2021 and 2022. Astronomical. And we delivered more units than each of those individual years in one quarter last year, and we did not see rents decline. So my guess is, as we flip it over and look at where permitting is, remember this tall column in 2024. If we move to the next one, all those permits were submitted in 2020. So now you're seeing, and the rough math is usually about 60% of what is submitted for permits gets built. So you can see, I think that adds up to 17,000, 12,000 built. And so you can see the limited supply of new permits being submitted for, and I think it's just a matter of time before we see a pretty drastic drop in not just the supply of new apartments, but some what I'll call whiplash in rent growth, because I think there's going to be major opportunity for owners.
So the other side of that coin, I mean, if you look at what's sort of this artificial absorption of units is development. It's just adding supply to the market. The other side of that is just job growth. And so if we have declining new deliveries and we have the job growth, that's could be astronomical rent growth. What are you seeing boots on the ground? Amazon's back to work as of January. What are you hearing from your Seattle owners about just increased demand, foot traffic? What are they seeing in leasing right now? And is Amazon's return to work having an impact?
Yeah, the best data we get is anecdotal right now. It's just boots on the ground, what are the management companies experiencing, and they're seeing more tours and more applications than they've seen month over month, starting in December. December, downtown Seattle, for example, we saw 2% rent growth over the prior. It was the first time we had rent growth in downtown Seattle in 18 months, in December. In my whole career, I don't think we've had rent growth in December. So I think it's an indication of Amazon being back to work, people showing up and looking for apartments. So it hasn't happened overnight. I mean, it's not as big, obviously, as the downtown core or South Lake.
Close to mine.
I don't know where that came from.
No. But it's even like the Expedia campus. It was all revved up to be delivered and be occupied, and it was going to be this big deal, and then the pandemic hit. So it's like things like that where there's 5,000 office workers that haven't really been sent fully back to work, or it's never been fully occupied. So talking to office brokers in the market, they're seeing early signs and grass shoots of new occupiers, new job growth. But yeah, it's going to be a big one.
And in vacancy rates, you said they've grown. Is in the suburban markets, on the other side of that vacancy, we've seen delinquency. Are you seeing as much delinquency in the urban markets? Is that impacting ownership as much?
I mean, hopping back to this slide, at the bottom of the black columns, you can see the 5.5% vacancy rate for the smaller buildings and 8.8 for the larger, much lower than we were 5 years ago. So an overall improvement. It's just been the last few quarters we've seen it tick up. But one of the things I've heard from clients that left the core during the pandemic and said, oh my gosh, chop, chaz, whatever, Seattle's never going to be a good investment market again, we're going to the suburbs, is they've realized how painful delinquency can be. You don't have it as often in Seattle. When someone can pay around $2,000 for a one-bedroom rent in Queen Anne, they're going to keep up with their credit and everything else. So I'm actually having clients that went, especially to the south end, to chase return or cash flow at the time, come back in and say the juice is worth the squeeze.
Yeah. I mean, it's exciting to see investors see the opportunity to come back to the core. Are there some markets that you've seen, you're seeing some opportunity where less development pre-pandemic or post-pandemic where you feel like there's going to be some grass shoots before others?
Yeah, sitting in our office, 2 Union, we can look out at Capitol Hill, for example, and at one point during the boom of last cycle, we'd count somewhere around 30 cranes, and right now you can count 1. So I think the areas that got hit hard by the pandemic, which were specifically Capitol Hill, Chop Chaz, and all the fun that happened up there. West Seattle had the bridge failure and made it very difficult for residents to get to the city. And then the University District that went virtual, and they had trouble keeping their buildings full. Some owners said they're as vacant as 50%. Those 3 are where we've seen nearly with no pipeline starting next year, like at all. And they're great investment in rental markets to be in. So I think those 3 are probably going to be the hottest to pick up first.
It feels like there's still just a lot of PTSD from what happened, almost in spite of the evidence on the street that renters are back, the market's back, there's vibrancy. We're above pre-pandemic rents, with the Bay Area is not, which is kind of shocking. Is the Bay Area is lagging us in rent growth, which, and keep in mind, Bay Area rents pre-pandemic were $4,000 and ours were $2,000. So we have a lot to run up compared to Bay Area. We'll talk about that in a moment, but it's still charging the core. So with that in mind, looking at investment sales.
Yeah.
So we talked briefly in my slides about what's happening with investment sales. We saw a big drop off in 2023, and in Seattle, there was a pretty good rebound in 24. What explains that rebound versus 23?
I think there's a combination of factors. One that you mentioned, Bay Area or LA, and just a relative affordability. If you compare what our rents are on average in Seattle versus San Francisco and LA, relative to what our median incomes are, right now we're sitting at 22% on average of people's income is going to their housing costs. Studies show that around 35% is the peak where it becomes like an unaffordable market. Right now the Bay Area is sitting right there at 34%, and LA, because it's such an expansive county and there's a lot of variety in their type of jobs, is actually closer to 50%. So on a relative basis, Seattle's affordable. We have this amazing companies, 2 of the largest market cap companies in the world are headquartered here, the rest have offices here. And I think people are predicting, although it may seem tough to us, our legislation here in this state is so much easier than California. We don't also have a state tax on top of that. So relative to West Coast, if you're going for core markets, gateway cities, Seattle's definitely been the belle of the ball in the last 12 to 24 months.
Yeah, I mean, I remember in 23 trying to sell a 5 cap deal in Seattle, and someone saying they can get a 5.5 cap in the Bay Area. And that was a market that got down to, call it a 3.5 cap. So it was just tough to get investors to come to this market. In 2024, with our rebound in rents, growth, just investors seem more comfortable, but we still have this bid-ask spread in the market.
Yeah.
And so we're still off, call it 50% plus of sales volume. What are you seeing with the bid-ask spread right now?
Yeah, I mean, bid-ask being what sellers want, what buyers are willing to pay, we've just had a divide. And it hasn't been like astronomical. Over the last couple of years, it's probably been around 50 basis points of cap rate. Now that where that 50 basis points is has changed with time. But if you look at this slide, and I wanted to highlight, if you look at 19, you can see 4.3 cap, $476 per foot and $402,000 per unit. In a day, we're sitting there at 5.1 cap and $390 per unit. So there's been a pretty big adjustment in the market, and I think the people solving it are more local buyers that own great portfolios in Seattle and see these as really great value opportunities. The biggest challenge to overcome, and it's all equity driven, market gets riskier, equity wants a higher return when in fact it's harder to produce. The people that are buying right now are going to forego that marginal 3 to 5% cash on cash return that everyone says they have to have, because they think they're buying 30% off. And the people that are not buying or bidding and getting second or third or last place, they're saying, I have to have cash flow and I want the discount. I just don't think you get both in this critical market.
So positive leverage, cash flow day one, and you're out of the market, essentially.
I just haven't seen it. Who's selling right now? They either have a maturity coming due and they don't have enough equity to replace that loan, or they're not operating well. So that's why you're getting a really nice good discount.
Yeah, but you're not having the cash flow because they're not having the cash flow.
So you gotta solve that problem to get your discount.
So the buyers, what's the archetype of buyer right now? Like, who are you seeing coming up and thinking differently that way?
Yeah, I mirror what I said. It was Seattle for the most part, and then we do have some folks out of the Bay Area. They're seeing this as opportunity. Having a few trickle in, everyone talks about the foreign buyer. We had a sale recently with some equity from overseas, and seeing the border open a little bit more and more interest from people in Vancouver, BC. That's a much less affordable market. So things are definitely opening up, but it feels like the biggest chunk of the buyer pool, especially in the private capital side, is going to be Seattle.
And it's interesting, looking across the West Coast and through the pandemic and looking what's happening. There was a point last year where I could track almost every larger sale on the West Coast because there was like 10. Like, I've just never seen so few sales on the West Coast. And what was interesting is Bay Area firms, there's a lot of Bay Area real estate firms, they haven't bought in the Bay Area in 10 years. In some cases 15 years because it was unaffordable. They were buying across the US. A lot of those Bay Area firms started buying in Seattle 30 years ago. They're about buying in the Bay. LA-based firms, same story. They were buying up here. They're buying back in LA because they look at the quality of their neighborhoods that they're in. That's why they live there, and they're betting on the future of those markets. And we've seen something very similar in Seattle, it's a great time to buy. There's less competition. But this leads to my next question, the bid-ask spread, what people are willing to pay and what sellers are willing to let it go for. The question is always, we've seen vulture funds raised, opportunity funds, everyone's trying to seize this. Who's going to win the bid-ask spread? Are sellers going to have to make an adjustment, or buyers going to make an adjustment? What do you see happening across 2025 in the next 12 months?
I mean, in the last 7 days, I think we've put 3 properties mutual, the listings we've had for anywhere from 3 to 6 months at or near ask price. So I'm seeing buyers have to
Step up.
have to bridge that gap. Looking at this slide, once again, these colors are just subjective to what I think, but what's important here, if you look at the per foot and cap rate on the bottom, is we've had an 18% adjustment down in per foot pricing in Seattle and an 18% adjustment up in cap rate. And I think people around the 20% mark is what you typically see in a recession, and you hit that number and that's about to bottom out, and then things move back up. So Dylan's always said things pick up where they left off. I think we should be a 500 per square foot market and 4.5 cap. We're just not there today. So punchline being, we've got rent growth per foot and per unit. Vacancy is up a little bit, but everything else points to it's time for buyers to step up. Like I said, I think you're going to have to forego a little cash flow to make these deals work, but if you want to make a great deal, and I think we've got probably 3 to 6 more months to do so, now would be the time.
So we're talking very broadly right now, price per unit, price per square foot, but we haven't drilled down in what are you buying? Is it a 10-year-old building that's core plus, brand new core, a 100-year-old building? In the marketplace, what are the most desirable assets, whether it's size, vintage, location? Where are the buyers clustering right now and getting more aggressive?
Yeah, I mean, desire creates competition. Competition pushes cap rates down. So the most desirable product is going to be your 2000s to 2010 product. It's ready for a refresh, but not a major systems upgrade. And there's very few of those buildings. They're large units. They have parking, things we didn't build last cycle, and they're very popular. We have to pay up to get them.
So all the core plus, newer stuff.
Yep.
So flip side of that, what's not being paid attention to? What's being left behind?
Same thing as in our society, old people, old buildings. It's just old. Anything old, it's been hard to operate. Insurance has been tough to get, financing, if you're not...
Notice how you looked at me when he said old?
If you're not upgrading the systems, they can be quite a nightmare. So most of the clients that are calling right now own older buildings. A lot of them actually are older themselves. They've had these buildings for years and years and years, and they're saying, I just got dropped in my insurer. I don't feel comfortable self-insuring. I don't feel like solving this problem. I now live out of state, and let's just get this thing sold. I did well, right? And so I think that's where also, probably next question is, where's the biggest opportunity? It's those buildings, because if I have a 2000s building to take out, I'm gonna get 15 bids and create competitive pricing, and everyone's gonna feel comfortable that they bought the 4.5 cap that everyone else would have bought too. But the building that's 100 years old, that has some of the systems modified, if you can put together the right capital budget and really focus on the management of that asset, what happened last cycle is the new construction got unaffordable, so people stopped buying it, looked for return, and then they started buying the 2000, 2010 value add, and that was no longer affordable. They couldn't make cash flow, so then they started buying the older product. So it will take longer, but I think if you can buy these buildings in great locations, they're charming, people like living in them, you do need to upgrade the systems to keep up with the insurance. I think there's gonna be a very wide buyer pool for you sometime in the next 3 to 5 years.
Excellent. So taking a look, expanding beyond this, I'm gonna invite Max Frame.
I pulled this from our 2017 market study, and I've had clients that are older that I pay attention to tell me it feels something like 2011 or 12 right now. And so if we look at 2011 and we look at now, or 2017, what happened? Now, will we have that level of meteoric rise? I don't know, but people bought in 11 and 12, they saw their values go up on a per unit and foot basis, almost 80% blended, with cap rates compressing 80 basis points. And I feel like we're in that moment right now. So it does feel risky, but there's not as much competition out there. I think there's major opportunity. And similar to 11, 12, 13, 14, I think it'll be a little bit lumpy. It won't just be a clean linear wave up, but I think buying now, no one's gonna be disappointed.
It's interesting with this one. I think back when I was in the Bay Area in San Francisco, people just didn't care if they were 100-year-old buildings. The city burned down 100 years ago and so much got built. And some of these buildings were going for $500,000-600,000 a unit until COVID hit. And I think sort of everything old is new again. This is a similar story. So next, excited to bring up Max Frame and Elijah Piper, and we're going to talk about Pierce County and Eastern Washington. So Elijah just joined our team a couple months ago. We've opened up Kidder's always had a Tacoma office. They were founded in Tacoma 50 years ago by our esteemed ex-CEO, Jeff Lyon over here. And so we're excited on our team to actually have our team's office, a new office open out in Tacoma that Elijah's starting. Elijah, you want to tell us a little bit about your focus?
Yeah, focused on 10 plus unit assets in Pierce County, Kitsap and Thurston, and also working on some development land, although that's kind of stalled out a little bit.
So Elijah, you heard us talk about all these people leaving the core, rushing down to Pierce County, big run up in rents. What have you seen in the last year in rental rates down in Pierce County?
Yeah, rental rates in Pierce County have been pretty flat. We're up nominally about 1% right now, but that is largely due to the large amount of deliveries we've had in Pierce County over the last year. So we see that growing over the next couple of years.
And on the flip side of that, vacancy, you haven't had quite as many developments, but with rents flat, what's been happening with vacancy rates?
Yeah, it's a tale of kind of two sides there. You've got the bigger product who's struggling to lease up a little bit right now. The 50 plus unit assets are hovering around 7-8% vacancy rates. The lower, smaller product, 50 and below, is a bit stronger performer. It's going to hover around 4 to 5%.
And we've talked about delinquency. It's been a challenge. We've seen some owners exit that market. Measure 1 down in Tacoma, which put a lot of sort of similar Seattle politics in Tacoma for the first time. That was passed December of 23. So last year was the first full year with Measure 1. Any impacts you've seen with Measure 1 in that market?
Yeah, buyers are a bit more picky on the neighborhoods they're choosing to invest in. They're looking for more quality neighborhoods, A and B class neighborhoods versus the C and D class, which are a little bit tougher to operate in. Those neighborhoods that are a little bit more desirable have become a lot more desirable for investors moving forward.
So looking again, capital markets, you got a slide up here. Pierce County had a stellar year in 2021. That shows an exodus of capital leaving King, Snohomish County, going down to Pierce. It's dropped off since there. unlike Seattle, we talked about a bit of a rebound last year. Investors have been a little bit slow to come back to Pierce County, or at least pricing's been off. What are you seeing transaction volume down there, and why do you think that it's still a little slow compared to historics?
Yeah, Pierce County, the recovery's been a little bit slower, and that's mainly due to us being a more tertiary market. You know, investors are coming down to Pierce County and chasing yield. You know, they want a higher cash-on-cash return versus Seattle, where you're buying a basis, and you can kind of wait it out. You can forego some of the immediate cash flow you can get. In Pierce County, you know, we're in an interest rate game, and so the product there has not really recovered as far as interest rates go, and so pricing needs to improve a little bit for that all to come together.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a timing game. Rarely do we see stuff fall off. You can look at this graph, as anytime it's been this low, it's certainly bounced back and recovered. Born and raised in Tacoma, local guy. What are the markets you like down there? Where do you think investors may be missing where the opportunities are this next cycle?
Yeah, like I mentioned, those much better neighborhoods in Tacoma, the north end, the west end. We really like University Place, Gig Harbor. Some of these more tertiary markets within Pierce County are becoming more desirable. You've got a bit higher incomes there. Really like South Hill and Puyallup. We're seeing a ton of industrial growth in that area, and so some of those markets have become a little bit more desirable.
Excellent. Switching gears a little bit, looking east of the mountains, Max. I got to put a plug in for Max. We didn't cover this market 5 years ago. Max joined our team, had been doing retail sales for a couple of years, joined our team, and in about 40 months put together 40 transactions. So I thought I might just retire because he did better than I did in the last 4 years building that market out there. So kudos to Max for just really building our team's presence. He said, I blame it on him having a 509 number, mine's 206, but they don't take my calls over there. Max has done a terrific job. You want to describe the markets you cover?
Yeah, so I'm focused anywhere from $1 million to $20 million in the larger Eastern Washington markets. So Yakima, Spokane, Tri-Cities, Walla Walla, Wenatchee primarily.
So a lot of people didn't know much about those markets till a little thing called COVID hit.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden we saw bodies and capital go over those markets. Saw a big run up in rental rates. What did you see, in the last year and previously? What's happened to rental rates over the last year, and how is that different than a couple years ago?
Yeah, so overall rental rates stalled a lot. Some markets more than others. Spokane, for example, had some of the highest rental rate increases in the whole country right after COVID. And so that bubble just had to pop, couldn't keep up with that trend. So Spokane's been hit significantly. They had a lot of deliveries. That said, the pipeline for development's really stalled in Spokane, so we're expecting that to get a lot better in the upcoming months, upcoming years. Markets in Central Washington actually did pretty well the last couple of years with rental rates. Tri-Cities and Moses Lake, job growth is still there. Amazon just put 1 million square foot warehouse in Pasco, so job growth is there. Yakima, they have extremely low vacancy rates. There's not a lot of product there, especially 4 and 5 star products. So if you're a young professional, want a nice living situation, can't afford a house, those 4 and 5 star products can be in high demand in that market.
I mean, I remember looking at some of the market reports in Spokane in 2021, 2022, that the vacancy rate was 1%.
Yeah.
Like in some cases, there's no vacancy, and that brought about 30+% rent growth in a couple of years. Where are you seeing vacancy rates across Eastern Washington? What are some of the bright spots, and where are some areas where they're still struggling to keep buildings full?
Yeah. The lowest is Yakima, it's about 1%. Highest is Spokane, about 7 or 8%. And again, a lot of that is just there's so much development that went into Spokane. A lot of concessions. I think like Jerrid was talking about, there's a lot of concessions out there. But that, like I said, that pipeline is almost flatlines for development.
Yeah, it seems like it's similar to this side of the mountains.
Yeah.
Like developers just can't figure out that equation. From a prospectively looking, seeing what's happening in those markets, are there markets that you expect to rebound rental rate growth more than others in the coming year?
Yeah, it's those Central Washington markets because of that job growth. Like I mentioned, Pasco has a bunch going in. There's a Broadmoor development, 1,200 acres of retail and office going in. Dairygold has a $600 million warehouse going in. So Moses Lake, just the industrial and warehouse market in those markets is bringing a ton of jobs.
And I can't imagine every developer in the nation is looking at those markets right now.
What was that?
Most of the major developers aren't hunting in those markets
Yeah,
right now
yeah.
to meet this new demand.
Yeah.
So switching over to investment sales, I mean, you look at our graph here, transaction volume, massive run up in 21, 22. Investors responded to that growth in Spokane. They looked at the pricing there, saw opportunity, dropped off in 23 like elsewhere. Pretty healthy rebound in 24. What are you hearing from clients on the buy side and the sell side? Like, how are they looking at these Eastern Washington markets right now?
Yeah. Well, last year it started slow. Second half of the year, sales volume more than doubled. A large part of that was just 50+ unit sales rejuvenated. For example, Q1 of last year, we had the largest sale in Airway Heights, and it was $4 million. So things are slow, especially for buildings with size and scale. Now things are coming back. Pre-pandemic, we were seeing sales anywhere from $75,000 a door to $100 a door. Jumped up to $140,000 a door, $150,000 a door. Post-pandemic, you can still get to some of the top markets, Richland, et cetera, but generally we're probably looking at $120,000 a door.
So for older product, you saw value inside of 4 or 5 years double?
Yeah. We sold one property, $75,000 a door in Spokane. It was early 1900s vintage. Sold it in 2021 for $160,000 a unit. So yeah, that owner did pretty well on that sale.
And then from there, that's probably fallen off another 10, 15% from there, but
Yeah.
still pretty elevated.
Yeah.
And then what about the new product? I mean, there was a lot in Spokane Valley.
Mhm.
You know, I was hearing numbers upwards of 250,000 a unit.
Yeah, the new product has, that's also made a resurgence. I think a lot of it was developers trying to stabilize with floating interest rates, which hurt. But so we've seen quite a few new construction go on market and sell, and we're seeing on the high end around 250,000 a unit. Now there's been some outliers. There's an 80 unit that sold in Wenatchee for 320, but on average in the top markets, 250,000 a unit. Some of the little bit quieter markets, smaller markets, around 200,000 a door.
Just to give everyone a frame of reference, I happened to get a listing in Richland in 2020 or 2016. And I said, "Where's Richland?" And my wife hit me because she's like, "That's where my parents live." I'm like, "Oh shit, we should go visit them." And so I took on this listing, and it was two-phase. One was 2010, one was 2014. Beautiful garden court product, Spanish style, terracotta roofs, full court basketball court, like completely overbuilt. And it's 2016. I was begging Seattle, it was 330 units, so institutional size, institutional quality. The community manager lived on site with her husband, and all the residents were their friends. So you can imagine how operations were. In place 5.5, stabilized 7.5, and the rates were in the mid-4s. I was begging Seattle clients to go over there. We sold it for a record-setting $110,000 a unit. Now Max is talking about values coming off the peak at $250 a unit. So I saw this in the Bay Area over the last 20 or 30 years of people not paying attention to Reno, Sacramento, Davis, all these markets. And as the Bay Area increased in value, people had to look outside that. Some very similar is happening right now in Eastern Washington. Max, you're in those markets a lot. You're from Yakima. Don't tell Matthew Garner. There's a little rivalry there. If you've heard Matthew Garner speak, his most derided market is Yakima. Always grinds Max up. What markets do you like in Eastern Washington? Where do you see growth opportunities and investment opportunities moving forward?
Yeah, I think if you're an investor, the opportunity it's Spokane. Spokane is more than double the sales of all other markets in Eastern Washington combined last year. So if you call me and say, "Max, I want 5 properties in the next 3 years," that's the market you have the best opportunity to build a portfolio in. Just the transaction volume is much greater than all the other markets combined.
And what about growth markets where you see rental rate growth, cap rate compression?
Yeah, it's the Central Washington markets. It's the markets that have the industrial, the warehouse developers going in, and Pasco is the quickest growing market in Tri-City. It's kind of looked at as the 3rd city in the Tri-Cities, but it's growing very quickly.
Nice plug for Tri-Cities here. My wife will thank me. We're gonna do something a little different with our last couple of minutes. We'll save some time for Q&A. But I've never brought all the team members up and all the brokers, and that's who supports me being up here and putting all this together. So how about everybody, all the brokers come up. We're gonna do a speed round, get to know the folks on the team. We're gonna have to share some mics here. So we'll go quickly. Jack, be here. All right, speed round, get to know the team. We're gonna start with Matt on this side. First question, where are you from and when you got started in the business?
I'm from Snoqualmie Valley, Carnation specifically. Got involved in the business right out of college, 2015. That's all I know.
From Camas, Washington. Like to say I got started in the business, helping my dad clear out vacant spaces he needed to show when I was 8 years old. Joined Dylan's team and Jerrid's team in 2023.
We're gonna go backwards a bit because let's go to Elijah and go work down the road because we don't know where he's from, even though I already said where he's from.
Born and raised Tacoma, Washington, and got in the business when I graduated college in 2019.
Max?
Yeah, from Yakima, Washington. Got an internship at CARE my junior year going into senior year of college, and joined right after college. So I've been in the industry about 7 years now.
From Camas, Washington as well, go Papermakers. And got started in 2013.
Hailing from Sacramento, California, not bragging, and been in the business for a little over 20 years. Jack? Oh, yeah.
My name's Jack. I'm from Seattle, and I've been in the business since 2022 as an analyst down in San Francisco.
Keep that. First job?
First job, I bought a pickup truck in high school and hauled trash.
Spaghetti factory, busboy.
Baskin Robbins, Scooper.
Also busboy, Tommy O's Bistro.
I cleaned chemical tanks at my dad's orchard.
Commercial real estate broker.
Golf course.
Keep it Matt. Dream job if you weren't a broker.
Dream job, someday I'm gonna own a bar. And what's challenging is there's a bar that just hit the market 5 minutes from my house right now. So.
No.
Dream job, I would definitely be GM of the Seattle Seahawks, and I'd rebuild our offensive line.
I don't have a dream job, but if I wasn't doing this, probably something in the agriculture industry. That's my dream job.
Dream job would be a sports agent, Jerry Maguire.
I live in Magnolia, and we can see boats going by often, and I always tell my wife when I grow up, I want to drive a tugboat.
Race car driver, and I track cars but not very well, so that's not gonna happen.
Professional skier.
What keeps you up at night?
Not making my calls.
10-year treasury.
A lot of things. Right now, I'd say it's good. I'm excited about the market. We have a lot of volume coming through, and I just like wake up in the morning excited to get in and talk to people. They're not so down anymore.
My girlfriend's 1-year-old puppy.
Probably inspecting those early 1900 buildings in Spokane, finding novelty with them.
3 putts.
I've got 2 kids, 6 months and 2.5, so I don't sleep.
Favorite investment market, Matt?
Seattle, U District.
North Tacoma.
Yakima, Matthew Gardner.
North King, Kenmore, Bothell.
Capitol Hill.
Urban Seattle.
Fremont.
All right, save it, we're over time. I'm usually pretty good about this, but I'll take a couple of minutes for questions if there's any questions. Yep.
We got high probability rent control. Give us your thoughts on the impact on the market, impact on pricing of value add deals.
It's a good question. I'll try to be as concise as possible. I think it will very likely happen. The question is what form of it. And if it's super draconian, like we're seeing in Minneapolis, it could get real bad. I don't think that's gonna happen. The legislature is starting to see the light there. When we were hearing about rent control years ago, Jerrid and I reached out to some brokers. We started our careers at Colliers, and they've probably been in business 40 plus years now in San Francisco. And we said, what happened when you had rent control in San Francisco? And they said, it got ugly for a couple years, and then everyone reset. And I just think that's what's gonna happen. You can't, the growing economy will outpace everything. It's happened in the Bay Area. We had really draconian politics in the Bay Area in the 1980s, based upon 70s urban blight. And if I would have invested, I wasn't able to. I was 5 years old there in the 80s. I wouldn't be up here right now in the Bay Area. And I think the same thing's happening here. So I think it'll have an immediate impact. But after that, I think we're going to reset expectations and deep value add, like the Bay Area. If someone moves out, you can adjust rent. So I just don't think it's going to impact that market over time. Wow, record. Well, again, thank you to the whole team for allowing me to be up here. Thanks to you guys for agreeing to be on this panel. And really just want to thank our clients. You guys show up, you make it happen. It's been a really wonderful experience for me building this team with Jerrid over the last 10 plus years, and seeing so many clients come in the room, show up, give us a call, grow their businesses with us is truly a pleasure. We're excited about this year. If you check your inboxes, we launched 4 new listings this afternoon are coming out. We've got probably a total of 10 in the next week or two. And there's just a lot of excitement about what's happening in these markets over the next couple of years, and really want to see everyone in this room win. We've had some tough years, tough sledding in this market, and really excited to help you guys achieve what you want to achieve in commercial real estate and multifamily. So thanks for showing up. Good to see all of you, and wish you a great rest of your day.